From the Milken Institute in Santa Monica, welcome to A Hollywood Exit. Can and should California increase incentives to the film, TV, and visual effects industries? Tonight, we're going to take a look at the scope of runaway production to other states and abroad. We'll also debate whether raising California incentives to filmmakers would bring significant production back home and whether that would be the best use of those public funds. The problem for Southern California entertainment workers is a serious one. As we'll hear from a new Milken Institute study, California has lost 16,000 entertainment jobs since 2004. That's an 11% decline. During the same period, New York's entertainment workforce has increased 25%. Other states have increasingly lured productions that would have been made in California, as virtually every state has started playing the incentive game. Well, our conversation is also against the backdrop of a state assembly bill that would expand the size and types of productions qualifying for incentives. Several of our panelists have lobbied hard on what that bill should contain. And let me introduce our panelists very briefly. Joining us, Kathy Garmezy, who is Associate Executive Director of Government and International Affairs for the Directors Guild of America. We welcome you. Also with us, Fred Barron, Executive Vice President of Feature Production, 20th Century Fox, and board member of the Producers Guild of America. Joseph Henchman is Vice President of Legal and State Projects and VP of Operations for the Tax Foundation based in Washington, D.C., and he came out to Los Angeles to join us today. Thank you so much, Joe. And Rajiv Dalal is the Director of the Office of Motion Picture and Television Production for the Office of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. But we begin with Milken's own Kevin Klowden. He is managing economist here. He directs the California Center for Milken and is co-author of the study, A Hollywood Exit. Well, to give us the scope of local production, the loss that we've seen, let's start with the study itself. I mentioned the job loss that you cite in your report that was released today. Let's look at a further breakdown of the numbers. Show us the trends, please, in feature film production and in television.
Well, what's happened first is feature film production in many ways has been going out of the state, not just since 2004, which is when we looked at, which was the last big peak of entertainment production here in California, but since 1997, when our lovely friends to north, the Canadians, decided that they at the time had a cheap dollar and they offered incentives on top of that and said, we want California's movies. And they started aggressively pushing after them. By 2004, we lucked out. The Canadian dollar had risen in value. For a little while, the US dollar was down. Films came back to California, but it didn't last because at that point, all of these different states suddenly wised up. A couple of whom had even figured it out before 2004, and suddenly productions went back out again. And so what we found is that over that period, you've seen a very consistent decline of feature film productions. You've got it where not only from the 2004 to 2012 period, we've seen the number of more successful movies that were filmed in California has dropped in half. In the last year of the movies with budgets over $100 million, only 2 actually filmed in California, and they did it in spite of incentives.
And this is part of the industry trend, right? Major studios are making fewer films, but much bigger tentpole kinds of movies. That is the strategy for the big studios.
Absolutely. It's a strategy because it's managing risk. They know that these movies, when they hit, will hit really well, and they don't have to waste all the money on marketing. They don't have to waste all the money on distribution. They can concentrate on some bigger films.
So we've seen the decline in feature film production, particularly big budgets that, by the way, do not qualify for the California incentive right now. There also has been a huge decline in one-hour television dramas. And I found it interesting in your report because you make you make a point of the fact that those productions spend much more in the community than, say, half-hour comedies or reality shows, that there's a much more of a multiplier with the one-hour dramas.
Well, absolutely, because one-hour dramas employ a far greater number of people. They employ people not only to do location shooting, but they do employ people for all of the secondary elements of costumes and sets and electricians and not only that, but all of the support crew, so your caterers and your trucking specialists, and they have a huge impact, and they do it over a long series of months. A successful one-hour TV show is going to be filming for much of the year. They're going to provide consistent employment over that time. When a movie is done with its filming, it's done, it packs up and goes away. In a half-hour show, he's usually stuck in the studio for a large portion of it, so they're not going out and impacting the community.
Okay, so, and we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of one-hour dramas that are being produced, cable, pay, and basic,
Yes.
and network programming. But in Los Angeles, there's not only been a decline, but the relative decline has been even greater?
Yes. Well, what happened is that we've seen about a 20% drop in the one-hour dramas that are being made in LA and California. The catch is that, as you said, everything's exploded. You've seen all of these cable shows. Netflix is now doing their own shows. Amazon is doing shows. And so what that means is that even though it was a 20% decline in numbers, in absolute numbers, it's a decline of well over 40% in terms of the actual share of hour-long television.
So one thing I don't quite understand, for a number of these states that offer these big incentives, Louisiana, New Mexico, some of the others, they are very slowly, if at all in some of the states, building a thick labor market to be able to keep everything in-house, to have all the crew that's necessary. So in most of these, people are flying in, right, from places like Los Angeles or New York to do these shows. If they're not developing their own industry, how long are they going to say, yeah, we'll keep paying the subsidies when they're not building an industry?
Well, it depends on the state and depends on what they're doing. The key is that we found is how much they build up the local infrastructure. If you don't just bring crews in, but you actually build local sound stages, if you develop the local crews, if you start shifting where people live and how they work, even if on a smaller level, then you're more committed to the long term, and the community wants you there for the longer term.
Well, New York is a prime example, right? Because they have that market of people able to work in the business. Productions don't have to import everybody to New York to do shows or movies.
Oh, absolutely. They already had Broadway, they had the networks, but the amazing thing is even on top of that, they added 10,000 additional permanent production jobs. That's not counting executives, that's not counting some of the secondary support jobs, that's just production. So that says that there is enough of a demand for them to keep growing and growing over this period.
All right, so New York has significant subsidies. They have their own local labor market. How could California be able to compete with New York unless it matched New York's subsidies? And theirs is what, $400-some million a year?
Well, that's the important distinction you need to make, is that there's the total amount of money available for subsidies in the percent. New York offers a 30% subsidy. California offers a 20%. But New York's a lot more expensive to film in, and they're trying to build up their base. In California, we have a much larger base. Even after you look at it, we have more than twice the number of people involved in production here in California than they do in New York. More than 2.5 times, really. So what that says is that we have the talent. The catch is keeping it here. So what our problem is right now is that the incentives are just $100 million. And as you said, they don't cover certain kinds of very important productions.
And the money's gone after the lottery early on, so most productions can't qualify.
Exactly. And part of the issue also is that the lottery was there to solve the issue of not enough money. And what it does, though, is that it creates a risk factor. It creates chance when people want to be able to plan out where they're doing their productions. So they're stuck waiting, and a lot of productions can't afford to wait around for themselves to come off the wait list. If they're, when there's a waiting list of 300 productions, they don't know if and when that's going to happen. And if they need to start filming, they're going to go somewhere else. They know they can get the incentive.
So then, looking at the final numbers here, if production company or studio has to take a whole crew, fly some of those folks first class to the location, put them up in nice hotels, deal with all the transportation issues, deal with the morale issues about moving a crew. What are we looking at in terms of a subsidy that you think could counteract that financial draw?
I actually think the 20% that's there right now is a really good one. The catch is, as you mentioned, is that we need to be able to cover the rest of the state, which is why the 5% additional to cover those costs for filming outside of LA, when people know that they could get back home on the weekends, the crew doesn't have to go that far, but they still need to go in hotels, that additional 5% is really important for keeping productions and letting them go up the coast, go up to San Francisco, go to Sacramento, go to Fresno, go down to San Diego. That's a big deal. We don't have to offer 30%. We don't have to offer Michigan's 40%, and we shouldn't. And the goal is to appeal to the fact that people don't want to leave.
Okay, but so let's say California does 25% for outside the 30-mile zone, 20% within, closer to the studios. What's then to keep other states who only need a few productions to potentially have an impact saying, we're going to pay 40%. We're going to do more than California and just keep upping the ante against California's Perry?
Nothing. And, quite honestly, let them do that. The fact is that if they want to fence with us, then we can basically dodge them, focus on what we consider important, which is appealing to the productions who realize that from a risk standpoint, you have a better cruise here, you have better facilities here than, most places around the country, and indeed most places in the world. And it means that the production companies and the studios and everybody who's involved have much better control.
Okay, so we have this bill in the state assembly. It doesn't have a dollar amount attached to it. It allows for a wider variety of productions to be included, and calls for doing away with the lottery and funding at a greater level than the $100 million a year. If you looked at the demand for the number of productions based on a 20 to 25% incentive, increased it to films with budgets of $100 million or more, but capped it at $100 million that you'd pay that percentage to. How much total money would we be looking about to serve everybody?
Well, to serve everybody, you'd have to do a complete analysis of it. And the truth is,
you're the economist.
Well,
I'm
the economist. I'm telling you that I wouldn't generate a number unless I looked at it exactly. And one of the things you really want is that you want the Film Commission and you want the state to be able to do that analysis. You want them to be able to have the tools to do that. The fact is, if you just want a pure demand, you could be looking if you covered everything, several $100 million.
Well, New York ran out one year with $400 million,
sure,
right?
They did.
So that's New York. So Los Angeles, where it's cheaper to do production, where more people live, you would have an even greater call on that subsidy. So, it seemed to me you could be talking potentially about $1 billion to serve.
Well, sure you can, but there's also reality. The fact is that the goal is to keep the productions in here who want to stay here. That's not everyone. A lot of productions will still go to wherever they can get the best deal, and we don't and shouldn't match those. And the fact is that we don't need to offer $1 billion and cover every single production who might apply, because a lot of them, it doesn't really matter. Either they'll go somewhere else or they aren't going to leave.
So how do you decide short of a lottery then?
You need to look at the viability of the production. You need to also sequester a certain amount of money so that it's just for television, because the fact is that they plan things out differently. There's a different time period.
So you use their production schedule to award the grants.
Exactly. And you make an effort to try and include the productions that have the highest level of value, a number of which we aren't capturing, such as the big budget movies.
Okay, we'll come back with more of your recommendations from the study, but I want to move on to you, Kathy Garmezy of the Directors Guild of America. Your membership is multi-level. You've got household name people that are members of your guild, and you've got people that are working on some of the smallest productions as second unit directors that we're not familiar with. What is the range of challenge for people's lives and careers because of this flight of production?
Well, you exactly encompass the sort of gamut that we do run. We run the gamut from people who are in the same situation as many of the IATSE and Teamster and other members, where they aren't
These are the
allowed.
technical guilds.
Technical guilds, the crafts guilds, and they aren't going to be able to travel with the production. So, for those members of our guild, they're scrambling to try to find work in a shrinking market, and on productions that do not have the steadiness of the hour-long dramas or pay the same as the big features. So they're scrambling for a smaller pot of money. For some who can travel, they're faced with the decision of moving away from their families for long periods of time. For our director members who have always been able to go everywhere, and whom we want to be able to have the opportunity to make films wherever they want to make them. But for them, for those members of ours, they're finding that what used to be, okay, you had to leave home for a few weeks or a couple of months, maybe at the most, in order to do something. People are now en masse in order to feed their families, they're having to leave their families.
So they're going from project to project to project.
We now have members coming into meetings who are saying, I haven't worked in California for 2 years. And these are people with families that they've had to leave. They don't want to interrupt their kids' educations. They want to create as much stability as they can. But so there's a emotional toll, there's an economic toll for our members, and on some level there's a cultural and creative toll, because stories about California are also not being shot in California anymore.
And this is a very big deal, what you're talking about, and hugely disruptive to families. And I'm sure many of those here tonight at the Milken Institute have experienced, and just show of hands, how many of you, this is your story working in this business? Hands for those of you, yeah, all right, number of people who this is your experience. Not to be insensitive, but there are a lot of professions where that is the life. It is itinerant, from long-haul truckers to people on cruise ships to magicians who travel the world. I mean, there are a lot of people. Is this industry going down that road to that's just what it's going to have to be? Because producers and studios are going to go wherever the best deal is, and there's no way around that.
Well, I think the key really to that question really is you want to create an environment that's competitive enough that people have the choice of where they go, whether it's the producers or whether it's our members. We want to create an environment where people can work, or at least have the option to work where they would like to. And even if it's an itinerant life, you still have that option, and you can make the choice to be able to be closer to your family.
Now, you lobby, you go to Sacramento. I mean, part of your job is to make the case for your membership. Have you gone to other states like New York and Louisiana, New Mexico, and lobbied on behalf of the DGA there? I mean, and is that part of the issue? Your guild and maybe others have been out there asking for these kinds of subsidies for production, for overall production, and that's been part of the problem.
I don't think that's part of the problem. I think we live in a global marketplace and a global filmmaking marketplace as well. And the realities of today are that there's going to be competition for what's a very lucrative thing to have in your community, an economic development tool. And yes, our guild, because we do represent 15,000 members across the United States and around, who live and work around the world. Yes, we did work on the New York incentive, and we were supportive with incentives in Illinois, and when Louisiana was talking about it, and in other states, because we have members in those states.
So how do your members who are here feel about that when your guild is out working for incentives? They're going to take jobs to other cities.
They're fine, because they recognize we're going to fight just as much here to make California competitive. We're not picking one over the other. We're trying to make California just as competitive. Our members understand that. Our members who live in New York understand we're working when we're trying to help in New York, and they understand when we're trying to help in California.
But in California, as you know, it isn't, the only business. There are a lot of different ones competing. Educational needs, infrastructure, traffic problems. So, I mean, you're kind of betting a lot that the incentive is going to come through in California to counteract these other places where you've successfully got incentives.
I'm not sure I quite follow what you're saying.
California, it's never going to be as easy to get an incentive here as in these other states, because of the diversified economy, and because of the diversified economy here. So the challenge is always going to be greater, right, to get incentives here than elsewhere.
Well, I don't think the challenge, if I may say, is for the diversified economy. I think New York and a number of other states have diversified economies. I think the challenge in California has always been that we are the home of the industry, and we have been for 100 years here. And for a long time, people took for granted that our industry wouldn't live because we were the home, and they took for granted that the stages that the studios had built would always be filled and everything. So our challenge has always been making people understand the nature of the business and that it would lead. And our disadvantage has always been people making the assumption that it would not. I don't think it's because we're a diversified economy. And yes, we have traffic problems here, but talk to producers about the streets of New York. And, there's always issues and there are always problems. People in our business are very clever at figuring out how to solve problems like that.
Fred Barron, who has worn both hats, studio executive as well as a producer. You've been out, you've worked long-term on productions like Moulin Rouge when you were in Australia there.
Months,
yeah, so you've been on the road long periods, separated from your family. I understand one of the things that attracted you to being a studio executive is you get to be home more often, at least. So that was a decision that you made. Is this business, just by definition, going to go wherever the strongest possible incentives are, bottom line oriented?
Well, I wouldn't think of it as incentives. Whether you get your money from a studio or your parents sell their house and give you money to make a movie, your job as a producer is to get every possible penny up on the screen. So you will go anywhere where you can produce, where you can maximize, where you can get the extra money so you could, because someone has a relative who knows Tom Cruise and it'll come in for one day. So you count the bagels, you do everything you can to get the money up on the screen. So it isn't so much. So I mean, that's your job. And when you work in my case, when I work at a studio, my job is to get the best possible price and put the best movie up on the screen.
So let's say one of your big budget films at Fox, you're looking at where you're going to shoot that film. You have access to, let's say, a 20% or 25% credit, up to $100 million of your big budget film. Would that be enough of a difference to keep you from going to another country or another city to do the movie?
It would make us real happy. I mean, it would help. I mean, because our budgets, unfortunately, they go higher than $100 million. The gross amount of money that we spend, say it's $200 million, we can take a $200 million movie and make it for $150 million. We won't be able to do that in California, but for the other films, it would help.
So would it keep you home? I guess what I mean is if the incentive is there.
It would keep all the romantic comedies. Here's the thing, the other, which we haven't really pointed out, is the talent lives here. And if you want to attract talent to your projects, whether it's a director or a movie star, it's nice to be home. So for up to $100 million, it would bring a lot of film productions.
But it's really only your top tier talent that would have so much clout that they would be able to dictate and say, look, I'd like to do this movie, but I want it shot in LA if I'm going to do it.
Well, it's not happening anymore.
With no talent.
Well, the top tier talent, including, Mr. Spielberg, has to go and look other places because the numbers don't lie. And we have a library of numbers that we go to and we show how much does it cost to make this movie in Budapest, Prague, London, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, New York, Atlanta, Louisiana, Los Angeles, and then go the other way, China, Australia, and Malaysia.
So let's just make it a little more concrete. Over the past 2-3 years, are there films that Fox did abroad that had there been a 20 to 25% credit in California, you would have done here?
Yes.
How can you give us a ballpark number of how many movies?
It's hard to say, but I would say, at least in the last 2 years, probably 10.
Really?
10
even
features.
with a rebate cap on only the first $100 million of a budget.
Right. I mean, the example is I think there was a movie called The Internship. It's about a $75 million movie. It was shot in Georgia. It takes place at Google. So they went to San Francisco for a week. That movie would have been done here.
All right.
That's Exhibit A.
All right. Very good.
And the other thing about the traffic,
Yeah. Yeah.
try driving around Beijing or Shanghai.
Yeah. I'm not talking about traffic for the productions. I'm talking about the push for state spending.
Oh, yeah, no.
California has, tremendous infrastructure needs. You're
Oh,
competing.
no, I get that.
You're competing against all kinds of other stuff. I'm not talking about, your trucks getting caught
Yeah,
in
I know,
traffic.
but it's the...
That's
what I
not
thought
the
you
issue.
meant.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I was just following Kat.
That's what he meant.
Can I say
Sorry.
one
Kevin,
quick,
yes,
just
Kevin,
one quick thing
yeah.
on this? Look, infrastructure is another area that I've always been passionate about, but California has done an incredibly poor job over the years in maintaining infrastructure. We've also done a very poor job in trying to protect some of the key industries in this state. I grew up with a number of relatives in aerospace. And I grew up with a number of relatives in entertainment. In both cases, they've either seen their businesses cut to the shreds or they've had to go and do lots of work somewhere else. The fact is that we have a lot of different needs in a lot of different areas where we've neglected. It's not just picking one over the other. You have to balance them out.
But it's a finite pool of funds that are available, so you do have to pick and choose.
Well, except for one thing, that with the entertainment incentives, the money doesn't go out initially. It doesn't go out right away. You actually have to get those companies spending the money, creating tax revenue in the state. They actually have to then do their accounting and present everything before you even pay any of the incentives
So
out.
you claim you've made the money back before you give it.
Right. Even if you don't make all of it back, even if you make 90-something% of it, that's a far better capture than you're going to get when you build a new highway and you don't have any kind of structure in place where gas taxes aren't paying for the highway
Well,
anymore.
except that the use of the highway by trucks and by goods, there's an economic benefit by the infrastructure being able to be a more efficient way of juicing the economy.
Well, not the way we've been running it lately, but yes.
But if you spend money on it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fact is that when you create an infrastructure for entertainment and you maintain that infrastructure for entertainment, it not only creates jobs directly, but it creates a huge number of indirect ones, and it's one of our greatest single exports that the state has.
Let me move on to Joseph Henchman, Vice President of the Tax Foundation. And let me begin with kind of an emotional argument. I grew up in Hollywood, surrounded by the studios. I'm a Hollywood High graduate. This industry, for me, I feel a real emotional attachment to it. Sure. And I think a lot of us do, even beyond the people in this room who make their living at it. It is a part of Southern California's history, its culture. It's important to us. And so, setting aside just the pure economic analysis, is there a case to be made that this industry is special and deserves special consideration?
I think so. And, the Milken report and some of the stories we've heard today, they talk about a real problem going on. These states are poaching productions from California, but the truth is more money, more incentives is not going to solve the problem because the other states will match that, and it'll just continue to be a race in the bottom. If California passes this bill, it won't bring one job back, it won't bring one production back because these states will match what California does. And the only difference is that the production companies will have more money in their pockets, their stockholders will have more money in their pockets. But it's not going to help the ordinary people at all.
You've consulted with other states on their subsidies. Are some of those...
Consulted is a bit of a positive term, I think. So, although I'm, here as the critic on the panel, I am doing your work in 49 other states, telling them how these are bad deals for their taxpayers. And we've managed to pare a lot of these back and even get some of them repealed in the last couple of years.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Are you seeing a move in the other direction? I mean, Michigan, of course, is a well-known one, but are you seeing other states abandoning this, saying, we're not getting the bang for the buck? Yeah,
we started getting involved in this issue about 5 years ago, right as it was hitting its peak of about 40 states offering incentives. I would say it's certainly at least plateaued at that level, if not drawn back. Now it's about 38 states offering about $1.5 billion a year in film and television incentives. The big trend that I'm seeing, more than the number of states and the amount of dollars, is the concentration. It used to be kind of every state had a small or medium program, but now we're seeing the incentive programs coalescing in a small number of key states. And a lot of them have been mentioned here already: New York, Louisiana, Georgia, and of course here in California. So really that's who that's who's competing right now for the production jobs and the activity coming out of California.
So your argument is this is kind of a race to the bottom. Everybody, this is so important to enough states with critical mass. They're just going to go up and up and up.
Yeah, and I'm doing my best to try to tell them that it's a losing proposition for them. I mean, I'm born and raised California. I grew up in Oceanside, 2 hours south of here, so I've got a lot of loyalty for this state as well. And I'm out in Louisiana and in Oklahoma and in Michigan and these other states and telling them this isn't going to create a permanent industry. The whole concept that they're doing there is, well, we're going to subsidize each production as it comes through. And if we have it build up to a critical mass of enough productions coming through, then you'll get the ancillary industries forming, and you'll get the studios and everything. And then we won't need to provide subsidies. But I've never heard of any industry develop that way, because you never get to that last step. You never take the subsidies away. What happened in Michigan, as soon as their 40% credit became unsustainable, Michigan has so many important other needs for their public dollars that they just ended the program. And this industry that trooped up to Lansing and talked about how much they loved Michigan and how they wanted to create jobs in Michigan and build an industry for Michigan, there was a cartoon-sized hole in the wall where they ran out of the state. There was zero loyalty shown to the state by the industry. And I mean, that's the important thing, is the same production companies that are...
There's one of Warner Brothers' biggest films is going to Michigan.
But the number of productions and the dollars spent in Michigan has dropped almost... it's almost all gone since Michigan repealed its credit, and you can't deny that.
I want to follow up on the loyalty issue, because House of Cards did its first 2 seasons in Maryland, right?
Right.
And $31 million worth of subsidies out of Maryland. Now they're saying we're looking for a better deal.
They're shopping around. They've postponed production on the 3rd season until June.
So our state's going to say, well, we're giving you all this money. You're not showing much loyalty to us.
And that's a big reason why Michigan and New Jersey ended their programs. And the recession really gave light to the fact that there's a lot of other priorities for public funds out there.
Yeah, Kevin Klowden.
Okay, just a couple quick things. First, Michigan didn't end their program. What they did is that you had a change in governors and they cut it back. And that governor cut back not just incentives for movies, he cut them back for everything. And it was his prerogative, because he was looking at the situation in the state and he was saying, the previous governor saw this as a way to add jobs, but Michigan, under the circumstances they were in, just looking at Detroit, couldn't really maintain it. And I would agree that, under the circumstances, it might not have been the right call for Michigan. But Michigan is a state that was offering extremely aggressive incentives. And what it does is it reflects the fact that if you engage in that race to the bottom, if you offer incentives beyond the level that your state can maintain, you'll have to drop them, and you should drop them. I'm not Kathy in that I'm not going to go argue in favor of every state doing it, because I'm not doing it for, I have my reasons as an economist. But by the same token, with House of Cards, that's a situation where Maryland actually said, look, we have a certain level of incentives we're promising you, and we're going to go back to the legislature and up them. That was part of the deal they sold to the TV show, is they said that money will be there. What happened is that the money turned out not to be there. They had to go back and propose new extensions of the legislation in the legislature, and it stalled. And so suddenly you have producers who are saying, we have to make our decision for the next year, and the money isn't there. That's reasonable. That's a normal business model. If you are going to go in and you're going to engage in incentives, you're going to do any kind of effort in terms of credits or otherwise, there has to be predictability. That's true everywhere.
So could a House of Cards, if this Boca Negro bill, if that were to be passed and they could be able to get subsidies for 1-hour dramas like House of Cards, you think that there's a strong play that show would come to Los Angeles?
I think that there's a good chance of that. I think one of the things that's been interesting is with the shows that have qualified, what people forget about is that if you get the lottery money as it stands right now and you're a TV show, you keep that year over year. You stick around. That's the kind of predictability that an hour-long TV show wants and expects. And if you're going to get involved in that, if you want to recruit an hour-long drama, you need to have the infrastructure to support it, and you need to have the incentives ongoing. It's kind of ridiculous if you to be in a situation where you're given certain promises, you set up your financial plan, you set up your filming schedule, and then suddenly a state says, oh no, we're giving it to somebody else, or we're doing something else. We would hate that no matter what we do. We'd hate that if, anytime we, go and buy an airplane ticket and suddenly they decide that to bump us off the plane. We get driven nuts because there's a certain plan and a certain expectation.
So Maryland told House of Cards, we're gonna give you this incentive in perpetuity till the show ends, or?
Well, I don't know the exact details. I do know that they promised a certain level for each year, and they certainly promised it through the third year, and then suddenly they hit the third year and they couldn't do it.
Okay. Let me bring Rajiv Dalal into the
Can I
conversation.
just add one thing about the
Yes.
the race to the bottom and everything?
Yeah.
Nothing has ever been proposed in California that in any way is an effort to race to where Michigan is. We've always been very realistic about what made sense for California and how the California incentives should be structured. So we never have raced to the bottom in this state to try to meet Michigan, and I don't think that's true, that's just inevitably what's going to happen in every place.
Rajiv Dalal, Mayor Garcetti's office, director of the Office of Motion Picture. Mayor Garcetti has made runaway production a priority during his campaign. He brought it up many times as an issue, trying to stem the tide of that. Tom Sherrick, the late Tom Sherrick, very prominent position he was given, as the films are for the city of Los Angeles. What does the mayor specifically want? What is his ideal that he thinks would keep production here?
Well, our office was formed for two reasons. The first of which is to work with the industry on this legislation, making sure that the legislation's right, and getting it passed, obviously. And second, to work on some of the challenges in the city, not just traffic, but some of the other challenges that the industry's been facing, whether that's in the physical production challenges range across the board, and they do in every city. But whether it's in parks and recreation, whether it's with DWP, fire, police, et cetera, there are always these challenges, and to make Los Angeles more film friendly, along with a proper incentive to bring runaway production back, is a very powerful duo, which will get us back to where we need to be.
But if the state provides those incentives, there are things you're not going to get, right? Because again, it's a finite pool of state funding. So
when you
money,
say you, what do you mean?
I mean the
Los
city
Angeles?
of Los Angeles. Yes. You're
Well, here's the thing. We're not trying to make this a Los Angeles issue. This is a California issue. This has always been a California issue. The majority of the productions do happen here, but even the majority of those productions go outside of the 30-mile zone all the time. And frankly, spreading the wealth throughout California is better than keeping everything here in Los Angeles. It's a healthier statewide economy, which makes for a better return on investment.
So is your point that you think that the spending on production in California will actually make more revenue for the state? Is that what you're arguing?
Look, return on investment is a very difficult thing to calculate, and I'm sure we'll have that discussion today. There's certainly our belief that there's significant direct expenditures, there's significant indirect expenditures, but the real focus here is jobs. It's middle-class jobs across California. Now, and as Kevin's report shows, it's a significant number of jobs. 16,000 that have left, 10,000 gained in New York. So those are big numbers. And when you're tying this in to, there's obviously going to be, and what I love about going last is I can take notes on what everyone else has said and I can comment on that. This discussion of race to the bottom, Kathy started to allude to it, that, look, we're trying here in California, we're trying to stay competitive. We're not trying to match 30%. We're not trying to have the biggest pool of money. And frankly, when you have a discussion with our
Well, if this bill passes, you will have the biggest pool of money.
there's no amount on it right now, so so you can't say that. But if you talk to the California Film Commissioner, who's in the audience, it's not $1 billion. It's not $1 billion that satisfies all production. It's actually quite a bit less than that. It may even be under 400 million, because you can't really judge it. Because there's so many applications, because everybody wants to get their applications into the lottery, so that they're really, we don't have that number, and it actually could be a number under 400 million that satisfies all demand.
But you know it's not going to stop at that, right? Because studios, as
Well, here's
part
the
of their
thing.
fiduciary responsibility, are going to look for more incentives.
We've had the conversation, and I come from Warner, so I know this stuff very, very well, and I come from the parent company also, and we've had these discussions. We've had these discussions with the heads of each of the studios, and if we can get competitive, it's not a matter of getting to that absolute last dollar. If we can get competitive, the executives will keep the productions here.
Have they
As long
promised
as-
to?
They have.
Get it in writing.
But there's another thing that
Because, no, this is an important point.
Real
because,
quickly, and then Fred.
I'm testifying on this issue in other states, and when a state increases their incentive, they use that as leverage, and then they go to the other states and say, well, you have to make your incentive more generous so we can bring it back here. And that's what they're doing in California right now.
Who's the they you're talking
Fred.
about?
Well, but the other thing that we're missing is it's really, this is not about the studios, because they're going to make the films wherever.
Yeah.
This is about the people in California, and it's also about the creativity of the project. The one thing that I've learned, and I've been all over the world, no one makes films like we can. We're the best, and it was created here. Every time we go offshore, we're losing some creativity. Our writers here, and we're making a film someplace else, and the talent that created, the visual effects people are here, but they can't talk to the director. This is where we're giving away our IP.
Well,
and we need to, and we will make better movies. And making better movies is good for the business, because then we'll make more movies.
This is what everybody wants. The question is whether the incentives would make that happen. But
It's a start, that's for sure.
Let me just
Yeah, Rajiv, yeah.
just one thing, because Kathy had also discussed this about subsidies around the country. It really shows that this is not just about the people of California, but this is about labor in California. The biggest difference between this incentive and others across the state is it focuses on the middle class jobs, on the crew, below the line, right? So even and the discussion, studios can get the incentives anywhere, and they'll make their movies anywhere, presumably, but it is the crew that benefits from this.
Yeah, I call it a reverse Grapes of Wrath. There's a drought here, and they're going back to Oklahoma. In fact, a very good friend of mine, who's one of the top lighting directors, has moved back to Oklahoma. Less taxes, and he's going to go work in Vancouver. He's going to go work in Louisiana. Why stay here? Kids are grown up. I'm just going to leave because there's no business here anymore.
Yeah, and I know I keep bringing this up, but Mac Brown, the state legislative analyst, did an analysis. He looked at the numbers. His argument was that it's not a program that pays for itself, first of all. Secondly, the argument was that no one's really looking at the loss of opportunity, the opportunity costs that are involved. And that's why I bring up other issues. Money could be invested more in higher education with a huge turnout. We could train more nurses if we had money to do it with huge economic impact. Those are middle-class jobs. There are a lot of important professions that could be subsidized here in California that would show a big bang for the buck. Film production, television production, digital effects are extremely important. But how do you put them above these other professions?
Well, but why would you
Kathy?
put them below them either? I
They're
mean,
they're not getting subsidies like what's being talked about here.
There's subsidies. Many industries in California have subsidies. But I think the more important point is that we don't view this, and I don't think it should be viewed, and the questions you rightly pose have been posed by others, that giving money for production to stay in California will take money away from other things. That's to ignore the reality of the revenue that's generated by these productions and by people being here and paying money and having their kids here and paying into the infrastructure of the state. And it's a sort of a false dichotomy to make it sound like to support one industry is to take away from everything else in the state. Nobody is saying that right now about the need for farmers to be supported, facing a potential drought. No, but nobody's saying it. Why does it mean that our industry, the signature industry, should be dismissed as unimportant
Well, actually,
in ways
a lot
that,
of people are debating what kinds of assistance that farmers should get. That is on the table.
but
So,
nobody's saying they should get none.
Yeah, Joe.
I mean, I'm very concerned that everyone seems allergic to putting a dollar amount on what this bill is. And I think the moderator made it very clear that this, it might be less than $400 million, which is currently the largest state program out there. That's New York.
420.
I think it's going to be a lot more than that if this bill were to pass. Now, the economist spoke that, even if 90% of the revenue from this program comes back in the form of revenue back to the state, 90% of the spending comes back in revenue to the state, it's a good deal. Well, other states have looked at this. Their independent analysts have looked at, how much revenue is coming back by offering these subsidies? And there's about 6 or 7 states that have done really careful analysis. So not just the income taxes paid by the crew working in the state, but also all the ancillary activity, the makeup people, the hairdressers, the hotels, the restaurants, and the induced tourism. People see a movie about a state and they want to go visit there. And adding all of that up, it's somewhere between 18 and 30 cents on the dollar back to the state. Now, California is different because of the homegrown industry. So I want to, it'd be good to do an analysis on that. But in these other states, it's a gigantic losing proposition.
Kevin Klowden. Hold on. No, Kevin had first dibs on this.
Okay.
So
Kevin Klowden.
Well, I mean, the reason I bring it up is because
Yeah,
Karen just said a very important point of you got to remember that it's not just dollars coming out; it's dollars coming back as well. But in most of these states, it's a lot less than a dollar for a dollar.
Right, Kevin
Okay.
Klowden.
All right, a couple things. Well, 2 things. You already said California is different. First is that Massachusetts looked at their program and discovered they weren't getting much back, and Massachusetts has no mechanism for capturing most of that back. I would actually say that Massachusetts, as it stands right now, when you first start out a program and you analyze it and you look at the money you're giving, and most of the crew is coming from outside the state, you're not recapturing most of the spending. You don't have catering specialists. You don't have a lot of the different groups that would handle productions. Yeah, you're going to spend most of that money. It's going to go out of the state. That's true in the beginning of any of those programs because you haven't created the local jobs. I'd go even further as to say in Massachusetts' case, that it might never work out the way it is. But you're comparing apples to oranges. New York's study, they did a very careful analysis on the industry and the incentives, and then proceeded to more than double them after that. Yeah. So you're looking at, you have to be careful when you look at some of them. The most egregious cases, yeah, they look bad. But even in New Mexico's cases, you had one study that said they weren't getting anything back, and another study that they were getting back more than they were putting into it, and then some. One thing I just need to point out, because this seems to be a very common misconception. I like Mac Brown, but what Mac Brown didn't do an analysis. What Mac Brown did was a review on the return on investment and a couple other studies and gave an opinion. There is no actual legislative analyst office full assessment of the program or how it's returning. It's supposed to be due next year. In 2015. It hasn't actually happened yet. And believe me, they would love to do a full analysis. I've spent plenty of time talking to them. They want to be fair, they want to be rational, and they should be, but it hasn't happened yet.
So you think when he pulled that number saying that it was at best dollar for dollar, probably less than that, he closed his report with that, you think he's just pulling that out of his hat?
No, I think what he did is that he looked at an argument which said that based on the studies that he was looking at, in particular, he cited the LAEDC study and the UCLA study. What he was doing is he was saying, I disagree with the assumptions in their methodology, which is perfectly reasonable. The problem is the number he created didn't have anything more than that. He was making an estimate. And he was making an educated guess. I don't have to agree with it because there's no methodology to argue with.
Okay. Let me take a question from one of our audience members. That is Hollywood's entertainment business going the way of Detroit with the auto industry, signature industry that's just going away and may not come back?
I don't think so. I mean, it's one of the most profitable industries in America. Everyone loves it, and Americans are going to go see films no matter how bad the economic situation gets. And we've got a very vibrant independent sector, a very vibrant visual effects sector. But I am concerned what this subsidy appetite, and we've heard it talked about a little bit, how the studios they'll go anywhere, and they don't care about anybody. They'll just go wherever the money is, and that has an impact on the quality of productions.
Fred, did you want to say
Well,
something?
we've already lost. California's lost their big event films. They're gone. Kevin's report, they're gone. We've lost it. The only way we can bring it back is with subsidies. But it's, and the studios, they care about people. I mean, it's not like they don't care about people. It's not the studios. It's anybody who is making a movie, a TV show, something for new media. Someone has some money, and they're going to make a project, and their job is to make that money go as far as possible. That's the way it works. So it's, it is going the way of Detroit production-wise. It's very sad that my friends in town have to leave and relocate.
It's just hard to imagine this region without a film and television
It's
industry.
horrible. And the divorce rate, I mean, I know we touched on it, and Kathy, is more. There are a lot of people who they're away from their families.
Kevin Klowden, maybe you've got a sense of this, but with digital technology and all the things that can be done, even the distribution of films, it's digital now. It's not people sitting in a lab, and so. Is part of what we're seeing just an overall decline in the number of jobs as this becomes a more digitized industry?
Well, we were starting to see a certain amount of that some jobs have been eliminated. Like everything else, certain things get automated, but other jobs get created. One of the things that was clear is that with the number of television productions, when you have different distribution channels and you have different places that want content, you create jobs to go with it. And we have a number of jobs that are being created at the same time. Yes, some jobs like your classic projectionist might go away. Some, certain jobs that might have been done by hand aren't around anymore, but a number of other jobs are being created. What's interesting is that you have a worldwide demand that keeps growing. We make far, far more money now on our movies outside the U.S. than we do inside the U.S. The markets keep on growing, and there are different options for all of that. So the potential is for the industry to keep growing. And even with some of the technological changes, the jobs haven't really been shrinking that much. The main pressure on the jobs right now is all the competition from overseas more than anything else. It's not even the technology.
Well, and so let's talk about visual effects, because as more and more films use sophisticated effects as a part of it, there's been a huge brain drain of people as those effects have moved to other places like London, Canada, trying to establish itself with that. There'll probably be other countries getting it. Is that something that is recoverable here, or is that going to be virtually impossible to keep here in Los Angeles?
Well, I think it is recoverable, but one thing is that, first off, the visual effects industry, more than almost any other aspect, was statewide. A lot of the support infrastructure for visual effects and for animation is up in the Bay Area.
Industrial Light and Magic.
Yeah, and Pixar's in Emeryville by Oakland, and for a long time, a lot of the spin-offs and a lot of the support companies for graphics rendering are up around San Jose. So it's a much broader thing. That is actually getting hit a lot more. Is it recoverable? Yes, I believe it's very much recoverable. The problem is that in some ways we've waited long enough that there's a lot of damage we have to recover from. Rhythm and hues is all but gone, and what's left is heavily in India. Digital domain, most of what's left there is up in Vancouver. Can they move back? Sure. Most of the talent who's still working those jobs are Americans and formerly LA based. They'd like to go
But
back.
if we don't move quickly, we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
Because the training in visual effects and digital artistry is going on everywhere. Asia is flying.
Well, I've read some criticism from people who believe the studios play a huge role in this, that they have so pitted the visual effects houses against each other, pushing and pushing and pushing down, what they're willing to pay, that's driven the industry, that the studios have just been ruthless.
I don't know if you can say the studios.
Yeah.
The major films I work on, where we go a lot of times, are directed we go where the director wants to go. So if the director has a relationship with Digital Domain, we try to make the films with Digital Domain. If a director has a relationship with NBC in London, we try to go there. But it is difficult for that balance. But
Well, I mean,
they're not. One thing we are clear about is we don't want to kill companies. In fact, the company I work with has gone out of their way to support visual effects companies, especially Rhythm and Hughes, when they're in trouble.
is there more that producers and studios should be doing to try and protect this industry in California?
It's hard to say because it's not their job. This is the job
But
of...
you've just made the case about the importance culturally, and
No, but
films are better, you just told us, in California. Now you're saying, well, but it's not our job.
No, what I'm saying is we're talking about two things. We're talking about the producers, we're talking about a corporation. You know, the corporation's
Well, corporation's job is to make as good a movie as it can.
Right, but I guess it's a little confusing, but it's not the job of News Corp, for example, to support California. But the people who make films here, and in my division, we want to keep it here because we think we can make better films here. And we have to prove to our bosses why. And if we have a strong visual effects industry here, we can prove that it's worth it.
It may not be News Corp's or Warner's or Paramount or anybody's job to keep California solvent. But is it not part of the responsibility to not drive down the prices so low that it makes it difficult to keep it viable in this country?
Well, that's with any business.
Right. Kathy, you want to say
The
something?
only thing I was going to say was that it is hard to have visual effects here if you have no big features here. Bringing big features back will certainly help. I'm not saying it will totally solve the problem, but it will help.
Can you explain why? Because, I mean, to me, I think of the post-production is that you could do that anywhere, regardless of where principal photography is.
True, but people often like to have it all in one package, and if you're shooting here, you're not gonna probably send it away. If you're shooting here, you're not likely to send the digital effects, away.
Yeah, especially if your visual effects crew lives here.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for them to drive down to Rhythm and Hughes or go up to ILM or something like that. There is a geographic issue that you're dealing with, even though it's all in the cloud.
Internationalized. Yeah.
Let me ask another question from a member of our audience who says, is my understanding this program brings an actual return to the taxpayer? Could you speak to that? We've touched on that a little bit. As the skeptic of this, Joe.
I mean, to defend the Matt Brown a little bit, I mean, it's hard to estimate this kind of thing, especially for a state like California. So if California were to enact, to basically remove the cap, and that's primarily what the bill does, how many productions would come back? How many more jobs would that bring back? How much ancillary activity would that create? Versus, if that money were spent on something else, if it were spent on healthcare or spent on education or returned to the taxpayer, what would have been the positive economic impact associated with that? And then what's the net between the two? You're comparing the world that doesn't exist with the world that does, and it's a very tough job to do, especially when you're looking at California that has an existing industry. But as I've said, in every independent study that's looked at this in every other state, these subsidies do not pay for themselves. They result in a net loss of revenue to the state.
Kevin, I keep asking you to do a lot of stuff. You're probably not explicitly studied, but you're the economist. So are there studies of aerospace when it fled and what the impact was, not just in that industry, but ancillary expenditures and interconnected industries to it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, can I give you the numbers right off the top of my head? No. I wish I could. You give me a little prep time, I could have come in with those. But but the fact is, one of the things that we looked at, we did a study on the brain drain what brain drain we did a couple years ago in California, and what we found is that the single greatest period where California lost well-trained, highly educated people was after the aerospace collapse in the 1990s. We actually have never recovered from the number of highly educated, skilled people in science and engineering that we had in the state at that point. Even the dot-com bubble didn't quite bring it back. And it is a huge issue, and it ripples all over the place. And what happens is when you lose that skilled worker base, when you lose your advantage, when you lose your cluster, you lose the comparative advantage that keeps productions, that keeps planes, that keeps other things. And you just think about the fact that our governor's office made a bid to try and get the 777X, speaking of aerospace, to come back here. That was an incentive. There were a huge number of incentives to do that because we recognized that we had an opportunity. It turned out the opportunity wasn't there, but we saw it.
So do you think that industry could have largely, if not in entirety, largely been kept in Southern California? The government could have afforded to provide enough incentives to do it, and that they would have stayed?
Yeah, I think so.
You don't think other states would just outcompeted California?
Well, no, because at the time we
That's
had
what's going on now. Boeing's looking for a new line for its 77X, and it's pitting Washington against Missouri, making them both pass huge tax incentives. So I'm not sure what basis he has for saying that wouldn't have been another race to the bottom.
I haven't said anything about that one way or the other. I was actually saying is that California chose to go after that and get involved in that, which is a very, very different kind of statement. Do I agree that Boeing might be going after a race to the bottom? Potentially, yes. But back in the 1990s, there was no reason to get involved in a race to the bottom.
We were the ones.
Because we were the ones. The fact is that when you have the factories or studios or production facilities, when you have the talent, you have a huge comparative advantage. You don't have to dump nearly as much money into creating that from scratch. And that, right now, is still our advantage. It's why we don't have to race to the bottom.
Rajiv, were you raising your hand to say something?
I was. I just, we've heard about kind of the studies that have shown that there's a negative return on investment. I just wanted to highlight that there are here in California studies that have shown a positive return on investment. I'm not saying that they haven't been criticized just as the other ones, just as reports in the other states have been criticized as well. Reports will be criticized by reports, and numbers can twist any which way you want. Everyone knows that. Okay?
Which is why it's important to look at the independent
hang on one second. And we can debate what's independent as well. But
one not funded by the MPAA.
Hey, hang on. Well, look, one funded by the MPAA, one UCLA overseeing an MPAA study, one looking at in Michigan or elsewhere on a state that doesn't have proper infrastructure, as the Milken report points out. That's not really my point here. Okay, the point is even if we are less than $1 return on investment, say we're at 80 cents return on investment. Okay, we're 80 cents return on investment, but we're at 80 cents return on investment and 16,000 jobs, and 10,000 jobs, and 20,000 jobs. That's powerful in and of itself. Maybe you can, maybe you can't show a complete return on investment, but the jobs account for something.
It is very powerful, but even with that in mind, everything is still a trade-off. So you have the 16,000 jobs, maybe even more that could be saved or created by this. On the other hand, the long-term deferred needs that California has had. So how does the mayor's office, the council members, how do California elected officials weigh them against each other? What are the criteria?
Well, look, there are a tremendous amount of competing voices, which will say that one is greater than the other. I think what it all comes down to, at least as far as we're concerned, and the majority of council members in Los Angeles, is high-paying economic jobs. High-paying economic job creation. And when you look, and even in Kevin's study, you're looking at, I think New York, the middle-class job that's created by production, or the crew job is averaging, some $80,000. And in California here, it's some $90,000.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good salary.
We remembered your numbers.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have to make one unrelated interjection. As much as I like Rajiv praising things, is I have to say, the reason I say it's a Milken study, not my study, is because my colleagues who also worked on this study, Priscilla Hamilton and Kristen Kay, are in the audience, and they did contribute tremendously, and I want to make sure that their contribution is recognized.
Very good. Very good. Another question from a member of our audience. Could you comment on tax credits being brokered and sold as short-term investments? Who is knowledgeable on that?
This is happening in a lot of states where
Okay.
it's, aside from the merits of the credit program itself, we see this secondary industry develop of buying and selling these tax credits. Because, of course, if production goes into Louisiana for a couple of weeks and they get their 30% credit, they're not earning enough income, corporate income there to offset all of it. And so they have programs now in a lot of states where you can sell these credits to somebody who will, that way you'll get the cash and it'll be traded to somebody else. And the important thing is what this means is it's real dollars out of the state's budget. It's not that a production comes in and they're paying taxes that they wouldn't.
Is there any difference?
They're getting
to
a
any
credit
other
against
industry?
taxes that they wouldn't have paid. No, that's the difference. If this, for most businesses, you just get a credit against taxes you paid, and if you weren't there, then you wouldn't have paid any taxes, so it's a net gain for the Treasury. But because credits are refundable or tradable, it is a net loss. So the
Okay, but
dollars
that's
being
not
paid
in
out
the
are.
California bill.
You wouldn't have to have an ability to trade credits in California, right?
No, I don't think that's part
It's
of
a
the California
Louisiana
bill.
issue or
Depends on
whatever.
how the bill's
Yeah.
how
But
it's
this
written.
is something that the studios are pushing very hard to make these other credits in these other states very lucrative, and that's causing the brain drain out of California.
Well, just
Rajiv?
one thing, the discussion of, look, there's certainly a market around America and internationally, even to some extent, in terms of trading credits, right? California, it's not going to happen in this legislation, except for possibly indies. It's just not going to happen. It's just not part of the discussion.
Well, you could even ban it, right? I mean, couldn't you, as a part of the legislation, say they're non-tradable?
Well, that's basically
that-
what it
that's what
does.
it-
The current
that's
one
what it
does
was.
Well, you
say,
said
except for-
indies, so I wasn't sure
There's a
what-
small allocation for independent productions because they don't have the tax liability to be able to use the incentive. Otherwise, the smaller productions, which are very vulnerable,
Okay.
we wanted to keep some ability for them to, compete for the
And
incentive.
they're the only ones who are really
But it's
in the
an
current.
So they'd be kind of a
But
protected
the rest is
class
not,
of
it's not
movies.
allowed for anything else in this legislation.
Here's another one from a member of the audience. British Columbia pays a 60% rebate for each visual effects salary. How can California be expected to compete with that? Is there a long-term solution?
60%? I don't know
That's
where
what
that
the
number
audience
came from.
member claims. I
It's
don't
not
know
quite
what
that
it is.
high,
Yeah.
but well, it depends on how you calculate it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if the BC government says that, if you actually look at the formulas, the numbers I've seen, it doesn't quite work out that way. But on the other hand, if you mash things together, they could probably come up with that. Honestly, I don't see how the British Columbia government keeps that. The only way they're doing it right now is essentially by diverting money from their VAT taxes that they have in the province, and they're trying to create and maintain this cluster. And the funny thing is, right now, they're actually under huge pressure from Toronto and Montreal in terms in their.
They're higher.
Yeah, because, and the answer is that no. Once again, you can't, nor should you compete on that race to the bottom. You're not going to be able to. What you need to do is you need to be able to say, we want to have better control of the effects. We want to be able to have all the talent in one place. We want to, and the fact is that even if the labor gets covered to some degree, that's not all the costs of visual effects. And the other problem is that the quality, and I'm not knocking it, but the quality of effects when you send them outside to somewhere else
Yeah, I'm sorry. We don't have a chance to talk back.
No,
to the audience.
I don't want to.
just finish your train of
my
thought.
My train of thought is that, look, what winds up happening is, in many cases, that unless the director, everybody's on site where things are. That's what they're making the case of before. That's what Fred was saying, is that unless they're directly tied into productions, there are severe risks. A lot of the outsourced visual effects wind up having to come back and get home. I know a number of people who make their jobs essentially redoing the outsourced visual effects. So we're not going to be able to keep all of it. We want to just keep some of it.
Let's see some more questions from members of our audience.
I'm sorry, if I could. The questioner asked, what's the long-term solution?
Yes,
and I
sir.
think that is the question that needs to be asked about this problem. Because, I find this debate a little strange because I really agree with everything everybody said up here. This is a real problem that's happening. Jobs are leaving California. They should be in California. How do we keep them there? And where you lose me is the idea of, well, the people who are doing this, the people that are taking the jobs out of the state, we just need to give them more money and ask them to stay, and that'll solve the problem. It's not. So let me pose a possible solution. We've got a very large congressional delegation in California, the largest of any state. Get them to pass a law which shuts down this market, this interstate war against the states. They can do it. It's constitutional. That'll solve the problem immediately, but you're never going to hear that solution because it doesn't line everybody's pockets.
Well, I was gonna
And are they
say-
going to go? Can they go to Canada and shut it down in Canada? And they can go to the UK and shut it down in the UK?
So yeah, and politically, it would just seem to be, please, it would seem to be a non-starter because you've got states who are obviously deeply invested in offering these. So,
If California is serious about solving the problem, the only way to do it is to get these 49 other states to stop this war against California. And the only entity that can do that is the federal government.
Well, that sounds good, but it doesn't reflect the real world, really, of what's likely to happen.
So let me just ask you as a practical matter, Rajiv, you're trying to get Fred to keep a film from Fox here in Los Angeles. What do you have at your disposal to make that case? Is there anything
Right
that
now
you're able-
or
yeah,
in the future?
Well, let's say a bill passes. Let's say there's money enough to fund his $200 million film. What is it you would say or want him to consider to keep it here?
I don't even think I need to say anything at all. Part of the so when you're looking at feature estimating and the feature estimating executives, okay, there's a formula, right? And it's not an exact formula. It varies here and there, but for each state, I mean, you can look at it as a chart almost. And for each state, there's the percentage rebate, and then they calculate costs and travel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the chart, on the right-hand column, there's a percentage difference, okay? And the percentage difference from Louisiana, which is 30%, and California, which would be 20%, the percentage difference is only 1 to 4%,
After
or
you
1 to
factor all
5%.
those other things
1 to
in.
4%, 1 to 5%. It is not, and I'm saying this because I've been over these feature estimating budgets 1,000 times back in my previous life. I don't need to say anything to them. I really don't need to say a thing to them. When it comes down to 1% to 5%, the decision's going to be made by the creatives on where they think they can make the best film.
All right. We had a listener ask a question. When you get to the airport in Raleigh, North Carolina, you're bombarded with posters of movies and television shows that are shot in the state. What is Hollywood doing to try and market itself? Would it make a difference, do that above and beyond incentives to try and get people to keep productions home?
Well, we forget that we have the best weather in the world. And for filmmaking, that's why it's here.
That's why it first came here.
The one thing about when we look at Louisiana, we know that there's certain times of year
Rain
you're
days.
not going to be there
Yeah.
during the hurricane season.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you're
you know
gonna
what the
lose
weather's going to
production.
be like in New York. And this is, and it's not just Los Angeles. If that 5% bump for leaving the zone is fantastic. I just came back from a film that we shot part of in Spain in the Canary Islands, where we got an incredible amount of money. And I showed pictures to my friend. They go, "Oh, it looks like the Coachella Valley. Looks exactly like it." And that whole film could have been done here. So the marketing, I don't know.
There's a certain amount of it that's already being done right now. If you ever see like one of those billboard trucks that drives around saying Glee is filmed in Los Angeles, it creates so many jobs. The answer is that yes, a certain amount needs to be done. It needs to be done by the state. It needs to be done by the industry. I think that you look at it and there has to be a certain amount of coordination. If you go and fly into Tennessee and you see all those ads at the airport about all the cars that are made nearby, there just has to be a certain concerted effort, and it has to not just be the studios. It needs to be the unions talking about the jobs, because once again, it really is all about the jobs, and there needs to be a combined campaign. And some of it's been done, and I agree a lot more actually has to be done, and it needs to not just be done in LA, it needs to be done all over the place.
I'm not familiar with this next question. Hopefully, you all have the expertise. I assume you do at some level to deal with this. Why not support the countervailing duty that's proposition put forward by the ADAPT organization that would place a tariff on subsidized film work when it's re-imported? Is there someone knowledgeable enough to talk about that? Because I've never heard of it. I'm not familiar with it. So, all right.
I don't
Okay.
know that.
Sorry about that.
Should we do it on Nike's shoes? And should we,
Yeah, so
Yeah,
can we
I
have some
don't know.
more audience questions from folks that we can share? to talk. I assume that means about when you bring the product back in that there'd be. Do you think California has incentives outside of tax breaks that we need to put more focus on? Are there other incentives, things just beyond the
Well, it's kind of
rebates?
similar to the last question, and this hasn't been brought up, but I think we need to look at California's tax, regulatory, and business climate generally. I mean, this project is one of only a very few things the Tax Foundation does. If you go to our website, we're constantly putting out stuff comparing the states on all matter of things, including income, sales, and business taxes. And California is usually at the bottom of the list on a lot of those. Very high taxes, very narrow base, very badly structured, and this doesn't just affect film; it affects all industries. California has outward migration of people, net migration of people. It has, we've been struggling a lot on the economy lately, and those need to be part of the discussion as well. Not in addition to what do we do to help this particular industry.
Anyone else want to talk about that issue, business climate overall, and what it means for production?
And ease, one factor that matters to a production is the ease of filming, and there's been things a number of cities throughout the state have done to try to, address those issues. That doesn't compete with incentives, but it is an add-on.
My favorite is West Virginia, where they will control the river flow for a film production. So if you need rapid rivers, they'll do it. If you need like a tranquil river scene, they'll do it.
Well, Rajiv, we can do that with the LA River, right?
Hey,
Why not?
street closures, I'm your guy.
It's navigable now, so why not?
But that's done all.
And I wouldn't compare to West Virginia. They've already shown they have a wonderful history of not caring enough about their environment. But it's
All right. Another question from the audience. Assuming California passes an incentive providing a benefit competitive with other states, what percentage of the peak of, 1997, could the state get back to? How big a difference would it make?
Depends on whether states retaliate and up their incentives.
Well, the thing is, the states have already, the other states are already ahead of the game. Honestly, the only state that could effectively retaliate against California without just competing in the race to the bottom would be New York. And honestly, they're so far ahead of us that it doesn't hugely matter. We could get back, quite honestly, to 90-something%. Are we going to get back to 100%? Not necessarily, because it's not just about what's going on here. The whole market has shifted. It's global. And what we want to do is that we want to keep what we have now and grow what we have now. We're not just trying to get back to 97. We're trying to make ourselves healthy and stable
And competitive.
now.
We're trying to make ourselves competitive.
Remember this, because when this bill passes, they're going to be back in a couple of years asking for more, and nothing will have changed.
The commercial industry contributes to LA's local economy. Is there anything being done to offer incentives for commercial production houses to shoot in LA rather than, say, South America?
Yeah, there are a number of discussions that are being had with the commercial community.
They're not included in this bill.
Not present, not in its current iteration.
Okay, and I have no sense of how much flight there's been. Is that something anyone here is familiar with? Flight of commercial production?
Commercials are having, last year commercials had a banner year here in Los Angeles. Just factual numbers, production days, et cetera. And we're looking, we're all, as Kathy mentioned, there are a lot of discussions with the commercial folks, and we're looking at, we're looking at the issue. We're looking at the business model also, because the business model is shifting, as it is in many different businesses. But, the ad agencies are now squeezing the production houses that are doing the commercials, so the expenditures are down. But that may be a business model discussion. So, it's still under review.
This week, New York State Disney announced Marvel Studios will film a series of superhero films for Netflix in New York City. They're getting a special package of incentives. Should California take a similar approach? I don't know if that's a project-specific incentive package that was passed by the legislature, but is that something contemplated here?
This is a good thing about the Milken study that came out is, it just didn't recommend, increase the credit, whatever it costs, do it, but it actually talked about how are the different industries affected. So I really have to compliment you and your co-authors on thinking about, what can we do to get visual effects back here? What can we do to get this back here? What can we do to get that back here? And I think that's a better approach and a better avenue to take than let's just increase the credit for everybody.
Yeah,
Speaking of Disney, I just wanted to ask, they're taking this, what is it, 48-acre ranch near Santa Clarita, Golden Oak, I think it's called.
Disney Ranch, yeah.
And they're putting in all kinds of studios and everything. So if so much production is leaving, why is Disney making such a huge investment in film infrastructure there?
Well, because there's so much, there is still, even with all the things that are leaving, there's still a significant number of productions here. And the fact is that they have a number of productions for the Disney Channel and otherwise that are eligible for these incentives, so they can stay here. And the current ones, even under the current structure, obviously they're hoping for more, but even under the current structure, they have enough to satisfy demand for what they have planned. What I think is important is that there is still that demand, they still have that hope, they still have that facility that they want to utilize, but at the same time, they also have an announcement that they will scale up or scale down the overall size of that project depending on what they think the local economy for film is.
Kathy, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the biggest obstacle in Sacramento is to getting this bill passed? The biggest pushback you're getting from legislators?
Well, we have just begun the process on this bill, so I'm not really sure what it'll be exactly, but I mean, I think what's happened over the past 10 years that we've been working on this is that there has really come to be an understanding in Sacramento, finally, that this is a problem, that nobody's been crying wolf, that it's a real problem, and that it has impacts statewide. I think if we get pushback, and I'm not even sure yet to say that we will get pushback, but if we do, I think it may be because some people do have ideological differences on how money should be used and how investments should be used, as witnessed one of our panelists.
Well, you got a Democratic majority, so and a lot of film money that goes into Democratic candidates for office in California. So are you able to call on that?
Personally, no. I don't think that's going to be the way this is going to play out. It's not going to be about who, those issues of money and who's done what. I think how this is going to play out will be making the case for the people most affected, the below-the-line members of our industry, making the case that this is real and personal and that it is a very dire situation. And I think that's the grounds on which this discussion and debate is going to happen.
Rajiv,
Just a quick one, because there was one question in here that just kept on popping back up, and it relates to this, which is the governor's stance on this. And I think there's a false impression out there that the governor is against this incentive, or that he said that he's not really in favor of helping our industry. I've heard that a number of times, the way that the question was posed on the screen, and that he may very well be their biggest obstacle. We've spoken to the governor a number of times, and he actually has come out and said that, look, the budget's going to be tight this year. There's a lot of competing interests, as we've already discussed, but and it's not the time right now to be spending on new programs. That's what he said. But in the same statement, he also said, but look, the film industry is part of our heritage here in California, and we're going to try to save as much of it as we possibly can.
But you well know he's getting hammered from so many different directions. Members of his own party who want to see social services upped in spending. Yep. You've got other people saying that the reserve should be higher than it is.
Sure.
It
comes down to all these competing interests, and at the end of the day, we believe that high-paying jobs are going to carry the day.
All right. Should it be the responsibility, viewer asks, of California taxpayers to make sure movies are more creative, as Fred Barron suggested? Shouldn't consumers of movies and television decide what they want? House of Cards seems to be a pretty creative, well-done series.
I think we're talking, yes, I think it's, House of Cards would be done here if they had the money. But putting that aside.
Would it be better if it was done here?
Yes, but we're really talking about employment right now. I mean, this is about employing Californians. We're not saying give us money for creativity. We're saying give us money so that we can employ California people who are the most creative. to work on our films.
Yeah, no, but I think they're going back to your comment. You feel that this is the creative center
Yes.
in the country, if not the world, for film, television.
Although New York will probably argue with us right now.
But they'd be wrong, wouldn't they?
Not if you ask my relatives.
Would Californians be able to more effectively deal with runaway production if they shed the illusion that the quality of California-made films are head and shoulders above the rest of the competition?
I would say that, honestly, illusion or not, that's opinion. That's not necessarily illusion. Part of it is that, if it's Californians who are making these films wherever they are, then it's Californians contributing to their quality. The real issue is how much do economics trump the quality of the production? And in the end, that's the reality that we're facing, is that you want to be able to have the economics line up just enough so that people can make the movies where they know that their overall level of quality, that they're basically the risk management on not only the budget of the production, but the quality of the production is more secure, and that's being in California.
All right. I want to close out. Oh, go ahead, Fred. Did you?
No, I just said that was well said.
I want to close out by giving each of you an opportunity. If the bill passes, let's say for the sake of conversation, it's got comparable to New York, $400-some million annually that's in it. What kind of a concrete difference do you think that would make in jobs, either in slowing the erosion of jobs or bringing jobs back? Rajiv, you want to start us on that?
Sure. Look, Kevin and I have been over this a number of times in terms of job loss and job gain in other states, job loss here and job gain in other states, and then the full-time equivalent numbers. If you look at the number of productions that have left because they didn't receive the credit here, and the average is 100 to 250 jobs per production, and they're good paying jobs. Even though they may not be for the entire year, they average somewhere between $30,000 to $50,000 for those jobs. We're looking at tens of thousands of jobs sustained or created. So that's where we fall on it.
Joe.
Everybody lobbying for this bill, everybody who comes to the legislature to ask them to pass it, make them all sign a statement. And if the bill's for 5 years of subsidies, make them sign a statement that says all of our productions will be in California for the next 5 years.
All of the ones that
make
get
them promise
incentives.
in writing.
Yeah, all of the ones eligible for incentives, we take the incentives
No.
and do it.
All of them.
Everything?
They think this is important enough. They think this is
well-
important enough. Make them promise to do that, or whatever percentage is appropriate to the legislatures. But right now, as drafted, this is a blank check for no promise, and I don't think that's a good deal for the taxpayers of California.
Well, if the
I
money,
assume you've worked with legislatures before, right?
I do full time, all the time.
if the money is there, the money will be spent. Meaning productions will come here and they will spend that money.
But you're not willing to try and quantify that?
Well, I don't think anybody is. I'm not in position to say I'm going to guarantee anything. I mean, nothing is. There's no guarantee, but if that money is there, production will. It will be eaten up. We'll spend that money on film production and TV production.
All right, Kathy?
I think what those of us who are working very hard on this would actually say is, and I know this isn't quite answering your question, but I think it's closer to the reality that nobody's taking anything for granted. Right now, we just are focused on trying to make the case and get this bill passed. We've all been in the industry enough to truly believe the case we're making, and that is what we see as the task before us right now.
Kevin?
Well, I'll say this, that when we're talking about jobs, we measure just production jobs, and when the jobs that get impacted are much broader than that. But one thing that the current bill doesn't have that it really needs to have is to actually directly address visual effects. And right now that's not in there, and that needs to change, because that's somewhere where tangibly you can affect jobs in people's lives. And if you have a large enough credit and if it's structured enough way, yes, you can talk with an impact of over 10,000 jobs. The issue is that you need to see it over a few years to see how that impact is. But this past year in 2013, the industry overall in the United States grew in terms of production employment for the first time in a little while. It actually grew. There is a demand out there, both in the U.S. and there's globally. And what we just need to do is make sure that the incentive is structured in a way that we can capture that growth and we can see the industry growing in California instead of shrinking.
Is it New York that offers the full credit for visual effects that are done? One of the states does, doesn't it?
New York has started offering it, offers a credit. Georgia also offers a credit as well.
Is that full post-production?
You have the experts over here in that regard.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So
But
it's pretty.
the problem in New York is there's not enough people. They don't have the animators.
They're actually trying to create it from scratch up in places like Buffalo because they know they don't have the capacity right now.
So would you, if you were writing the bill, would you include the same level, 20-25% incentive to VFX?
Oh, absolutely, I would. And I think that it needs to be, you just need to change the calculation so that it's included and it counts towards what we currently do in terms of calculating production days. We need to calculate that in as part of the formula because, as Fred said, it's part of the whole package. And visual effects, because they were independent and they didn't have a union, weren't originally lobbying or considered because we didn't think they'd leave. But they have left, and one of the great ways that we can grow back is that we need to be part of that digital future, and we need to create those digital jobs.
I want to thank you all very much. Kevin Klowden of Milken, thank you so much. Kathy Garmezy of the Directors Guild of America, thank you so much. Fred Barron, 20th Century Fox, thank you. Joe Henchman joining us from the Tax Foundation, and Rajiv Dalal of the Mayor's Office of Los Angeles. Thank you all. Thank you for coming out tonight. For those of you watching at home, thank you for joining us.